Well, good evening. Welcome to When You Give a Biologist a Kitchen with Alysha Melnyk, class of 2014. I'm Susan Kreischer, Associate Director of Alumni Relations. Here to introduce Alysha is her classmate and Sigma Kappa sister, Laura Lee Bent. Laura Lee was a communication studies major and student employee in the Office of Alumni Relations, where I had the pleasure of working with her. She is a digital marketing manager for David's Bridal and a member of Susquehanna University's Alumni Association Board. Before I turn it over to Laura Lee, I want to welcome several Susquehanna University staff who are attending tonight's event, including President Green and First Lady Lynn Buck, Melissa Kumura, Vice President for Advancement, Logan Sweet, Associate Director of Advancement Communications, Beth Winger, Leadership and Engagement Coordinator. If you have questions for Alysha, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. We will do our best to answer all the questions at the end of the session. And I'm going to warn you all that I am going to record this session. Yep, and we're recording. And now I'll turn it over to you, Laura Lee.
Great. Hi, Susan. Hi, Alysha. Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Susan. And hi, everyone on the line. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm very excited to have the pleasure to introduce Alysha, my dear Sigma Kappa sister, as Susan mentioned, and friend, Alysha Melnyk. And I have to say, you guys are in for a treat. Tonight, Alysha is going to share a little bit with us, a little bit more about her cooking inspiration for her blog, The Kitchenologist, and share some tips around creating seasonal recipes. She's also going to highlight the benefits of shopping and eating local, and also a few spotlights on some local farmers markets, vendors, and producers. Alysha's blog, The Kitchenologist, is a food blog dedicated to eating healthily and experimenting in the kitchen. She's combined her background in biology with her passion for making delicious, eye-catching, and accessible food. I myself have actually had the pleasure of tasting some of Alysha's recipes and even hold on to a cookie recipe she shared with me several years ago. I always get compliments on it every time I bake those cookies. So thank you, Alysha. When Alysha's not cooking in the kitchen or dreaming up a new recipe, she's working as a lead educator at ECRI, an international medical nonprofit that's dedicated to improving safety worldwide. And as if she didn't already do it all, Alysha's also pursuing a Master of Public Health at the Dornsife School of Public Health at Drexel University. Welcome, Alysha. We're so excited to have you here and learn a little bit more about the Kitchenologist.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura Lee and Susan, for the warm welcome, and everyone for taking the time out of your evening to connect. I'm really excited to see so many familiar names, and definitely looking forward to when we all can be in person gathering again. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will dive into the presentation. So I'm hoping to keep this to around 30 minutes, just so there's time for questions and diving into anything anyone wants to ask. But thank you all so much again for joining When You Give a Biologist a Kitchen. So once again, just please, any questions you have, feel free to use the Q&A feature to type those in. I'm happy to answer anything, whether it's related to what I cover tonight or anything you might be curious about. I certainly am open to that, and I will share my contact information at the end of this presentation also. So the key ingredients for the presentation tonight, I'll be diving into a little bit on my background, sources for cooking inspiration. We'll be talking about local food, in addition to touching a little bit on food justice, and also ending with some recipe inspiration. A little bit about me. So as Laura Lee and Susan had mentioned and touched on, I graduated from SU back in 2014. I have a bachelor's in biology and also completed the honors program. Today, I still am involved with SU in a number of different ways. I serve as a mentor for the STEM program, and I also serve as a volunteer academic advisor for Sigma Kappa. So really neat for Laura Lee to host this presentation tonight. It's so great to just reflect on that sisterhood in general, and also to see so many of our sisters on the line tonight as well. So after graduating from Susquehanna, I actually started right away working for ECRI. You may have heard of ECRI historically. It's also called ECRI, ECRI Institute. If you're diving way back, it actually stood for Emergency Care Research Institute. So you can get a sense it has gone through some rebranding even in the 7 years that I've been there. And initially I started as a clinical writer. So essentially I worked for our forecasting team, which looked at medical technologies that weren't yet approved for use in the US, but were likely to be approved in anywhere from 1 to 5 years. So essentially our team was looking at what impact those technologies could have once they hit the market. So whether those were, items like cost, any sort of, utilization or uptake, if they had very promising clinical trial results. So we wrote research papers and did a lot of the in-depth analyses on that end. So that role has evolved. I still do some writing now, but mainly what I do today is implementation and education. So I work specifically with a membership within ECRI. It's called Clinical Evidence Assessment. And I help primarily hospitals and payer or insurance organizations get evidence-based information to inform their decisions. So an example of that would be, if you work at a hospital and you're vetting a new technology and you're wondering what evidence is out there actually supporting the use of this technology. So, is it showing promising results in patients? Is it actually intended to work as advertised? And when you're looking at payer organizations, they're updating coverage policies, writing new policies. So we support all of that through what we do. And with ECRI, I've been very fortunate to have a strong work-life balance. And if you speak with anybody who knows me, I have a number of different hobbies and interests. So that has taken up a lot of my time outside of work. And one of the primary ones, of course, is cooking. To be honest with anybody who asked me, I was not somebody who cooked a lot. Even in college or before college, it was really something that I picked up after. You see, as I go through this presentation tonight, that I'll touch on sort of the things that led me to this interest in cooking and also sourcing local. And last but not least, as mentioned, I did start my master's in public health this September. So a lot of different overlapping and interweaving parts as to my science background and what I do currently. So inspiration from Susquehanna, I had a lot of very pivotal moments during my experience at Susquehanna that really led me to the point that I am today. And you're probably looking at these images and they look very disjointed, and I will be honest with that. So I will walk you through sort of a story as to how these different parts and experiences really led me to what I do from a food blogging perspective now, and also what I do at ECRI. So first and foremost, with the honors program at Susquehanna, if you're familiar with that or went through the program, we had to complete a sophomore essay project. So this is a big task. You had to essentially pick a topic that you wanted to do an in-depth research paper on. You had the option of presenting it through a poster, or there were some oral slots available. So when I started SU, I had a personal goal of getting better with public speaking. I was very, very shy in high school. So that was something in college that, along with doing these types of activities with public speaking, but also, even joining a sorority that was very much outside of my, shell because I was so shy. So all of these experiences, led me to being able to, public speak, present information. So with the topic I selected, I wanted to select something that was scientific, but also a little bit, I guess, controversial, or something that I felt like needed more information or backing. So I did select vaccines in the childhood autism scare, solely a media-generated correlation. And it's interesting because I submitted that paper about a decade ago at SU. And I actually wrote a paper recently on vaccines and pregnancy specific to COVID-19. So it's interesting how, this topic is still relevant. But with that, I'll still remember that after giving the oral presentation, I had an audience member who came up to me and thanked me, essentially because they felt that they had given their son autism because they vaccinated him. And that really sat with me. It's something that I thought about, there's a lot of great information out there, but, as scientists, we need to do better as a community at getting this information out. Everybody, in our fields of expertise, there's a lot that we know, a lot of knowledge, and maybe it's not getting communicated to everyone or the right people. So after that, my junior year, I had a chance to study abroad. I was in Australia for about 4 months. And when I lived there, I really ate the best I ever did out of my entire life. Really in Australia, a lot of the food was focused on, whole foods, getting local. What I had through my university was very basic. It was a lot of like your proteins, your rice, your beans, your vegetables. They ate a lot of pumpkin there, which I still find very interesting just because I didn't expect it. But with that, I really recognized how much of an impact food has on overall well-being. So when I came back to Susquehanna as a junior in the spring semester, that's something that really stuck with me and I was thinking about more and more. And then my junior into my senior year, I had the chance to intern at Johns Hopkins. It was a really terrific experience where I worked on a number of different projects, but the one that really stood out was a research project on clinically proven dietary supplements. So I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the supplement industry. They use a lot of terminology, they claim a lot of things. Clinically proven, we were investigating into that because if a company is purporting something is clinically proven, there's supposed to be clinical trials and studies out there. So I evaluated about 100 of these. I ended up, calling the companies, doing research, and I believe only 1 or 2 out of those 100 actually had studies on their product. So this is, certainly something of concern, and it led me to really think about also in the food industry, how we advertise foods. So, for instance, one prime example, if you're going out to get eggs, you're going to see labels like organic, free range, farm raised. What do all of those things mean? So once again, just back to scientific communication and being transparent to the public, making sure people have the information they need to make informed decisions. So senior year, I was fortunate to take a class taught by Dr. Alyssa Packer, and it was Sustainable Food Systems. So it was one of the upper level bio courses that we could pick from. And really that was the class that brought everything together. So we had the opportunity to read a lot of scientific articles. We read books by individuals who are really zeroed into healthy eating and farm to table. We worked at Susquehanna's garden, which, I've always had a garden at home growing up, but that was really an opportunity to really go out, connect with the garden, do all of that work. So that was an experience that really tied all of these components together for me. So as I mentioned, after college, I had some more free time. I wasn't in the lab or studying late hours. Of course, that's changed now since I'm in a public health program. But with this, I started using Instagram. It wasn't something I actually used a lot during college. And I started posting photos of the food that I was making, I was creating, experimenting with. And I was really surprised to find that when I tagged some of these companies in the posts that they were, resharing them on their platforms. And I was starting to get a lot of questions from people as to, how did you make this? What ingredients did you use? Where did you shop to find this? So speaking with family and friends, I had some individuals who mentioned, maybe this is something that you could take further or something that you can do. So, I was thinking about that more and more. And then I really, landed on just the concept or the idea that what I was doing was essentially revolving around the scientific method. So, something that we were all probably taught in, middle school, if not earlier, and also too, of course, at Susquehanna. But this was actually a snip of a post that I wrote when I was working on my blog and first launching it. And really applying to, what I was doing in the kitchen was what I was really taught as a practicing scientist. So of course, first and foremost, asking a question in regards to what do you want to eat? I wonder if X, Y, and Z ingredients would taste good together. And then you're doing that background research. And it was interesting because Susan, Loralee, and I were talking the other night, and I commented how it's so different today for recipes, very different from our grandparents' generation, for instance, even maybe our parents, in the sense that we can go to Google, we can pull up these recipes. There are so many different resources to go out and get materials. So you're able to go out and get recipes you want to make, or even create your own doing that. And then of course you're constructing that hypothesis. So if you are creating something that is new and unique, you're wondering if you combine certain ingredients together, whether or not that's going to create something that's good or if it's not. And then you're testing it. So I'm always transparent. I have people who ask, do you have any major failures? And absolutely. I mean, I can tell you last week that I tried to use a new type of flour. It's a chestnut flour. And I was trying to do this, scallion pancake thing. It was a total disaster, but that's okay because that's part of the scientific process. So you test that, and then of course you're analyzing your data. So in the case of the chestnut scallion pancakes, that was not good. So after that, you decide, do you report the results? If how, do you need to circle back and, redo the experiment? You need to do something different? Or in my case, is it something that, I would retest, have a friend test, and then end up posting to my blog? So, with that, with the, creative outlet, with the photos, with, understanding sort of how my background as a scientist was tying into everything, the Kitchenologist then was officially launched in December 2017. And I really credit my first, what I refer to, food blog client, Taproot Farm, for really keeping my blog going and keeping me very creative with what I'm making from a recipe perspective. So they actually reached out to me over Instagram. And they lost the individual who was doing their food blogging for them. She had ended up moving to California, and they were wondering, since I was local, if I would be interested. And it's a pretty straightforward trade in the sense that I do about one recipe for them a week in exchange for a large organic vegetable share, which I think I'm getting a really good end of the deal on that. And I continue to tell them that, but I've been working with them for 3 seasons now, and it's worked out great for both parties. But during that time, really by word of mouth and by going to my local farm market and through social media platforms like Instagram and also LinkedIn, I was able to connect or was reached out to by a number of different individuals who are within the greater Berks County area in Pennsylvania, which is where I live, and also in Pennsylvania. So just to highlight a few of those, of course, I mentioned Taproot Farm, who I've worked with for a very long time. Amazing Acres, they are a goat cheese farm. And I actually worked with them this past year on a goat cheese recipe cube goat calendar. So that was something they were able to sell at the market to help support their farm. Also too, Funny Farm Apiaries, they do honey. So their big thing was a lot of individuals don't know what to do with honey beyond maybe just stirring it into tea or drizzling it on a dessert. So they wanted somebody who could come in and think of, even some more savory recipes or some other ways to use the honey products. Along with that, Dragon Hill Farm and Events, they're a new client of mine. They're actually based in Upper Bucks County. And they're not quite open yet, but the owner, Wandy, is actually working on creating a space where not only are they going to have professional cooking space for individuals to, come in if they're doing any sort of small product or batches or even hosting some sort of event. And they also have a farm where they're going to be producing some different products and packaging and selling. So it sounds really neat. I'm excited to see as it continues to evolve and as we work together. And Melanie's Medleys, they are an artisan cream cheese company. So similar to the honey story, they were trying to get individuals to understand what can you do with cream cheese beyond just spreading it on a bagel. And last but not least, I wanted to highlight It's Season. So Whitney Frederick, she is an SU alumna like myself, and that is her seasoning company. And the seasonings are incredible. So I use her garlic and herb seasoning on so many different vegetable roasts. She also has a savory Sazon seasoning that I use in my chili. So I definitely recommend, checking out her website. I know that she can ship the products and they're really great. I also want to credit Susan because I believe she got us connected through an alumni event or something like that. So it's been really great to connect with her and just see her business grow and succeed. And last but not least, during the pandemic and this past year, I've had the chance to work with somebody who I connected with actually over LinkedIn. His name is Vincent Salento, and he is the owner of the Lowoxalate Kitchen. So I'll be diving into more detail about some background on this cookbook. It's a PDF version. We also do have a hard copy, but it really has, as I'm sure you can imagine, a science tie-in to what exactly he's doing through his Lowoxalate Kitchen business. So I wanted to dive into a little bit about local food. As I mentioned, this is something that has really grown into a source of inspiration for me personally, and really something I'm motivated to promote through my blog and through social media. So with local food, there really tends to be a debate on what constitutes local. So what I've read for a general rule of thumb for somebody who is a strict local consumer, you're looking at products that would be based about 100 miles from where you live. So raised, grown, produced locally. Some larger grocery store chains and even the US Department of Agriculture may refer to local as anywhere from 400 to 450 miles. So they may gravitate more toward the term regional. I know I've seen that used in different grocery stores around here. And I do consider myself a locavore in the sense that I really strive to, eat locally, get food that is produced locally, but I'm not perfect with that. So, I love certain things like, for instance, bananas and avocados. I wish we had local banana and avocado producers, but we don't have that. So I always like to encourage that, eating locally, it's not, a marathon right away. You start with a sprint, you start with a few things, and then maybe you find over time that you grow that into a longer and more extensive process. So I wanted to show an example just as a visual as to what a 100-mile radius looks like for somebody who would consider themselves a local eater versus the average mileage that food can travel. And that is on the lower end of that. The average does tend to be 1,500 to 2,500 miles. And keep in mind, some things travel a lot further than that. So there are certain products, for instance, actually Japan is our main exporter for seafood we're getting in the US. I believe about 70 to 80% of our seafood is imported from Japan. So, keep in mind from a distance perspective, that depending where you live and where you're getting it, it could be traveling a lot longer. And what you can see, so I have the radius for the 100 miles based off of where I'm located, and it actually does give me flexibility. So you can see that it actually dips into New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, it looks like even potentially Washington. So even for me, I consider that, I try to get local foods that are produced in Berks County and neighboring counties, but there's still a lot of flexibility for a 100-mile range, where versus the 1,500-mile, you can see that, that's covering half the United States, it's dipping into Canada. So if I'd go on the upper end of that, we'd be dipping down into, probably Mexico and maybe South America. So there is quite a difference in regards to the distance and where food is coming from when you're shopping locally at farms and at farm markets versus when you're going to your local supermarket. So why local food? This is something that, I'm constantly asked. And when I speak about local food, there's, a lot of conversations that can happen. So first and foremost, if you talk with anybody who tries to shop local, you're going to hear that the food is fresher and therefore tastes better. So something I can, advocate for in that sense, anybody who has gotten any sort of salad greens from the grocery store, when you get those salad greens home, that you have about 3 to 4 days before those are going to start to turn or do something strange. So I was impressed that when I started shopping locally for salad greens, that those would last about 2 weeks in my refrigerator. And I had never had that happen for salad greens unless it was like spinach or kale, something a little heartier. So that's something that I noticed immediately. And when you think about local food too, it is better for the environment. So as I mentioned, with that travel component, there's a lot of steps involved. It's, you're harvesting at the farm, you're loading it up into a truck, it's going to a packaging or manufacturing facility. So even too, bananas and peppers, loose fruit and vegetables in the store are, minimally packaged most of the time, but they still have that sticker on it. So it still has to go through some sort of packaging process before it actually goes to your supermarket. So of course that uses a lot of fossil fuels, it uses a lot of packaging. So it's something to keep in mind from an environmental perspective. When you shop local too, you are keeping money in your local economy. So I always like the phrase when individuals say, invest in the type of future you want to see. For me, I would love to see more small farms, small businesses, individuals who can, do what they're passionate about. It's so tricky. So when you're supporting that, you're understanding that you're investing in your local community and that local economy and can hopefully support more individuals who have those sorts of dreams and aspirations. And in that sense too, it really helps build your community. I've found that the farm market is really an added community to my friends and family. I know mostly everybody on a first name basis, which is great. And I really encourage, individuals who have a farm market or something like that near them to check it out. These individuals are very kind and know so much about what they're producing and what they're growing and can make suggestions based off of what you like to eat or what you like to cook. And in that sense too, I really truly believe that eating locally does help you eat healthier. So when you think about a grocery store and you talk about health, I know that I've heard general rule of thumb is, don't shop in the center of the store, shop on the outskirts because you're getting more of the produce and fresh foods. So with a farm market, yeah, you're still going to get like your pastries, you're going to have your pastas. So different things that still have some processing involved. But you're also having a lot of meats, a lot of vegetables, a lot of fresh fruits. So in that sense, I feel like it really helps me eat healthier because I'm cutting back on some of that more processed stuff and really focusing on the stuff that's minimally processed, if at all. So I wanted to touch a little bit more on Taproot Farm. And of course, this is one farm example. I'm sure you all are thinking about local farms you like to shop at or places you've heard about. So as I mentioned, this is the farm that I've worked with since really the beginning of my food blog. And they sell produce year round. So I've been up to their farm in Shoemakersville, Pennsylvania. It's in northern Berks County and it's absolutely stunning. So I recommend following them on Instagram if you like farm photos and photos of vegetables and fruit. It's really inspiring. And they have 30 drop-off sites for their produce. So they really travel around in regards to trying to get their product out to the community. They also have weekly farmers markets. So if you're actually in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, I know they have a few markets down there that they do as well. And they also support small retail shops. They support some restaurants in the area. So a number of different ways that they're getting their product to market. And it's really more than just a vegetable drop-off. So they've partnered with a number of different local producers and vendors that provide other items. So cheeses, breads, eggs, coffee. This year they have somebody who's doing herbs, and they have a medicinal share and one that's specifically for making cocktails. So they're really coming up with things that are creative each year, really trying to make it a one-stop shop. So you are trying to get to more of those items in one place. And as I mentioned, this year, it's the third season I'm working with them. And traditionally, I've done more, not very intensive recipes, but I've done more full meal recipes. And after speaking with one of the co-owners, Ola, she mentioned that really what they need were basic recipes. So when individuals go to their farm markets, or even individuals who sign up for their produce share, they find that individuals may ask, I've never cooked kale before, I've never cooked beets. And that's something that, personally, I've started to take for granted because I've been used to cooking these types of things for so long. So based off of that, we've discussed that this season, we're really going to focus on some basic recipes. And I also want to mention too, she does partner with some Philadelphia chefs. So this season, she does have George Sabatino, who's doing some more intensive recipes with, a lot of different steps and details and different ingredients. So, certainly if you're interested in that as well, her website does have recipes that are publicly available, but here are just some examples of some of the really basic ones that I've been working on. So ones that, don't take long, but I mean, most of us, I think when we are done with work during a weekday, we want something that's really easy. So we're meeting both ends by providing some different types of recipes and different ways to cook the vegetables they offer. So I mentioned CSA, and I know I noted I was going to go into a little bit more detail with this. So community-supported agriculture, or sometimes I've heard it called community-shared agriculture, is a way to support your local farm by subscribing to a box of weekly produce. So it's seasonal harvest, what they're producing on the farm. What this does essentially is it provides the farm with support and money to understand that they're producing these vegetables, they have the community support that are going to buy the vegetables. So in that case, then they don't have to branch out and do things like, going into like a superstore type production scenario or anything like that. So it's really helping to promote an equitable and sustainable agriculture system. It's keeping things local. It's letting them focus on their farm. So keep in mind that if you really want to dive into local eating, I definitely recommend doing a CSA. These are everywhere, essentially, and a lot of people do them seasonally. So some people even run a spring, summer, fall, winter type share. I know Taproot, they run a winter share, and I always recommend that to friends if they're sort of unsure about whether or not a CSA would be for them, because you're essentially getting what they're harvesting. So it's not a guarantee week to week that you're going to get things that you've seen or had before. And with the winter shares, those tend to be shorter seasons, at least in Pennsylvania. So definitely a way to dive in and get exposure. I also wanted to touch on local farm markets. So of course, these are just a sampling as well, but the ones that are based near me are the Growing Roots farm markets. So they have one located in West Reading, also two around the Philadelphia suburbs area. And really with that market, they're bringing together a number of different producers. So once again, making it a one-stop shop where you have your bread, your eggs, your meats, cheeses, produce. So all of that is in one location. And I also wanted to mention too, since of course this is a Susquehanna presentation, Selinsgrove also has a farm market. And I actually have never had the chance to stop by. I have driven by it a few times, so that's definitely on my wish list of places to go. I love when I travel to stop at local farm markets too, so I definitely encourage that if you're out and about this summer, that if you're traveling somewhere new, farmer's market is a great way to get a taste of the local cuisine. They'll know the best restaurants too, so even if you're going and just trying to get recommendations on where to eat, I definitely recommend using the farm markets in that way. But I also wanted to point out that for the Selinsgrove Farm Market, that when I went on their Facebook page just to check hours and to make sure everything was still operational, I saw that they had a call to action they posted this past weekend where they need individuals to help with planning and social media and volunteering at the market. So in addition to, trying to eat local, another big component of this is, if you want to get involved, if you want to understand local food better and you have skills that you think you could contribute, a lot of these organizations can't, afford to have a full-time marketing manager or somebody who's doing all of the social media posting and organization. So if you have something to contribute or you would know somebody who would be interested, I can guarantee you that there are local farms and places that are nearby that, would certainly appreciate that help. So with that, how to find farm markets, because I think this evening all of us are located in some different areas. So the USDA does have a directory for farm markets, and I have tested and vetted it. So you can type in your location, you can add some different filters and things like that. So they also do have a CSA directory. So if you're interested in diving into a produce share, like I was discussing, that's another way to locate some farms that are running that in your area. They also locate food hubs. So these are essentially grocery store style, but they're places that only try to source local producers. So an example of that in Berks County, we have a place called Ole Valley Organics that focuses on getting in local food. So it's a really small supermarket, as I'm sure you can imagine, but they're trying to get a little bit of everything from local producers or people who make things that are in the area. They also highlight on-farm markets, so any farms that sell right out of the farm. So we have a number of those here, and I'm also right on the county borderline for Lancaster County, so I'm a little bit spoiled by having a lot of that around here, but I definitely recommend using that directory, or even asking around or just using Google. Those things certainly pop up. And I also wanted to mention to you that a lot of these farms and programs are really trying to make their produce accessible. So, for instance, the Taproot CSA, they broke that down even into a payment plan for individuals. So historically, you used to have to pay that whole lump sum up front, but, they were finding individuals really wanted to eat the vegetables, participate, but they could only pay on a, weekly basis. So they were able to work that out. Also, too, a lot of the farm markets do take SNAP. So any sort of federally nutrition programs that are getting that support, you are able to also find that featured in different areas. So with that, I also wanted to touch on programs supporting those in need and food justice. And this is just a sampling of programs that I'm familiar with, but I know that, if you ask around, you do some research, these programs are based virtually everywhere. So with Reading, Pennsylvania, we do have a food pantry called Helping Harvest, and it's a fresh food pantry. So I don't know for anybody on the call, when I used to think of food pantry and what I volunteered with in high school and even for some projects in college, you think of canned foods, boxed foods. I never thought of fresh food. But of course, that's really important, to get individuals fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, meats, eggs, dairy. So with that, they have a fresh food bank where they distribute across our areas. And I mean, during the pandemic, of course, food insecurity has been at an all-time high. So I've seen, they're literally right down the road from me. I've seen their trucks out constantly during this. So, I definitely recommend, getting involved with food banks if that's something of interest. Also, too, Groundswell Center for Local Food and Farming. They're based in Ithaca, New York, and they have a number of great webinars and resources on social justice and equitable access to healthy food, and access to land for growing it and for fairly compensated food jobs in the food system. So I definitely recommend checking out their page. I'm not sure if you're up in that area what their policy is right now with COVID-19, but I know in the past they have had sort of, you can go and visit, you can see the farm and everything like that. And last but not least, Gaining Ground. That's based in Concord, Massachusetts. I had a friend who worked there for a few years, and I had a chance to visit her, and we harvested vegetables, and we were actually there during a food pickup day. So all of their vegetables and fruits are harvested, they're packaged, and then distributed to the community, to people in need. So that was really inspiring to me, just to see the number of cars and larger vans and vehicles coming up for people who took it to all different places in Massachusetts. So I also wanted to go into a little bit detail with the Lowoxalate Kitchen Cookbook. So as I mentioned with this, it does have a science tie-in. So Vincent and I, as I mentioned, we connected over LinkedIn and then later had spoken more on Instagram. So he created the Lowoxalate Kitchen because he was actually personally diagnosed with issues with recurring kidney stones. So when he got those kidney stones analyzed, they had a high oxalate content. So in that case, when you are getting recurring kidney stones and they are finding high oxalate content, individuals may recommend that you try a low oxalate diet. So my understanding from my little bit of research and talking with Vincent is that, for plants, oxalate is a necessary nutrient for survival, while for humans, apparently we don't necessarily need oxalate. So sometimes our body may have too much of that build up, which can lead then to potentially kidney stones. So this is diet that could be prescribed in that case. A lot of the recipes are something anybody could make. But I want to mention that with this, I wanted to share a food list. And I know this is probably showing up pretty small. So just to, walk through this, but also too, he does have a website. So I recommend if this is something of interest or someone, let them know. There's a lot of great resources on there. So you can see that the foods in the green are the ones that, individuals on a low oxalate diet could eat on essentially an unlimited basis. When you get into the yellow, you want to eat those in smaller portions or maybe moderate consumption. And then you have your hardcore no's. So examples of that are nuts and seeds, beans, grains, tomatoes, potatoes, cornmeal, corn flour, chocolate, cinnamon. So different things that when he switched to this, diet for medical reasons, he said it was very hard because he had certain things that he missed, certain things that he wanted. And one of those signature things was potato hash browns. So he grew up in New Jersey. He loved the diners. He said he missed that most of all. So when I spoke with him, I said, I actually did a root vegetable hash brown. It was for kohlrabi. It's a pretty unique vegetable. It's not something that you can find too commonly in stores, but when I spoke with him, I said, I could take this and use this for virtually any root vegetable. So we settled on turnips, and this is actually a feature of one of the recipes featured in the cookbook. And if you're wondering what that little green box is, I know I've had some people ask about that in the past. It's for estimated oxalate content. So he's able to essentially estimate how much is in each recipe to give individuals an understanding of, if they're making this and consuming this, how much oxalate they'd be getting then from a consumption standpoint. So with that, I just wanted to provide some recipe inspiration. When I look at my blog and what individuals are clicking on or what they ask about, it's typically the recipes that are using some stranger vegetables. So rutabaga is a vegetable that you can see a picture on the bottom right there. If typically in the past I would walk by that in a farm market, I would not buy it because I have no idea what it is. I would have no idea what to do with it. I would be bringing it home to rot in my fridge. So with this and with the rutabaga, this is also something that could be used for the low oxalate diet. So it is a recipe that's also featured in the cookbook. It's also one that I've had tested and vetted by a number of people. So I thought it was a good one to share this evening. And I believe it is also up on my food blog. So between my food blog and Taproot Farm and the Low Oxalate Kitchen, you'll find some different recipes spread about those sites. But it's a really basic recipe. So you essentially need one large rutabaga. You need olive oil or any type of cooking oil of choice. And then if you want to make the garlic aioli, I do roast garlic cloves with this. Also too, you can use mayonnaise or an alternative to that if you don't like mayonnaise, and any sort of herbs or spices. So very basic. Really the hardest part is just cutting that rutabaga into any sort of fry shape. So once you get past that, you're in the home stretch. So you basically cut that up, you put that on a tray with parchment paper, you put the rutabaga fries on that, you put your garlic, you toss that in the olive oil. You bake that then at 420 for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then you want to try to flip the fries and cook it for another about 10 to 15. So once you're done cooking that, first you will take the garlic out, and then you'll just mash that using a fork in your mayonnaise or mayonnaise alternative, and then you'll serve it right with the fries. So you can add some additional spices, some herbs, anything like that to top it. And then there you go. That's your rutabaga fries. And like I said, I have had people test this. That's always the biggest thing with my food blog is when I have somebody else make it to ensure that, okay, this is translating to somebody else's kitchen. It does actually look like fries. So if you're looking for something lighter, something a little different than, potatoes that are fried in oil, you can, certainly try a recipe like this. So just to, wrap up, a lot of people may wonder, okay, a lot of information, how do I get started here? And as I mentioned during the presentation, there are a number of ways to get started with eating local, eating healthier, cooking at home. So first and foremost, I touched on, shopping at farm markets. As I mentioned, they're everywhere. So even if you are traveling this summer, I encourage if you're in an area to check out the local market. Also too, visiting local farms directly. I think a lot of places are opening up, so they are allowing visitors to go in and check out the farm and ask questions. And if you really want to dive in, a CSA, I highly recommend, especially too, because then you don't have to really think about shopping for vegetables. You just get a box, and it also encourages you to try some new things. Certainly I can vouch that some of the things I get in the CSA, I would not have picked out on my own because I wouldn't know what they are. So it's a way to really dive into some more vegetables and once again, support your local farmers. So some things we didn't touch on tonight, learning what's in season. Easily by, Googling your location, you will be able to find a seasonal calendar, and it will essentially tell you what vegetables and fruits are produced in your, state or area, when they are in season, so you can kind of know, okay, I can probably get this from a farmer at this time, or this is something that's out of season and I'm going to have to go to a grocery store if I really want to get that item. And with that too, also just choosing restaurants who source locally, that's another, sort of next level thing. I always appreciate when restaurants put on their menu that, they source from somewhere local. Even actually a few months ago, I was up in Selinsgrove and I made a stop at the Brew Pub, and I saw that on their menu, they even highlighted some of the different places they were sourcing from for their menu offerings. So a lot of places are doing this now. And last but not least, growing your own food. So it's amazing if you have access to a space to do, an actual in-ground garden. I think for a lot of us, we may be in smaller spaces, may not have that land space. So for me personally, I do a lot of herbs. I do microgreens. They're very easy to grow. So if you're looking to dive into that and don't have a lot of space, I definitely recommend that. Also too, just reading, attending webinars. As I mentioned, Groundswell Institute has a lot of different webinars on, food justice. Michael Pollan was someone who I was introduced to actually through that Sustainable Food System course. And In Defense of Food is still a book that I will reread over and over to this day. And one of his, food rules that's pretty signature is eat foods, not too much, mostly plants. And to me, I think that's, a pretty good guidance to live by. And also too, I just invite everyone to, do a locavore challenge, especially too, if you can share that on social media. As I mentioned, a lot of these farms, it's really supportive for them. A lot of stuff spreads by word of mouth. And I can tell you too, a lot of the businesses that I do this for, they have come back to me and said, this has been really helpful. We actually got a client who somehow was connected through your account and saw us. So really, you may not think you're doing that much, but even if you're not using social media, talking to your friends or your family, it's a way to get that word out there and really spread the information. So I wanted to end with this quote because I thought it was pretty clever and pretty relatable. But when you think about it, everything in food is science. The only subjective part is when you eat it. And I just want to thank everyone, once again for attending tonight. And, based off of Laurelie's comment, I did track down the sugar cookies that I first made, ways ago, probably not that long ago, I don't know, 5 years, when I first tried out that recipe and was getting into cooking and baking. And it was one of our Sigma Kappa reunion gatherings. So please reach out to me. I know I have my contact information there for a number of different platforms, but I certainly invite any questions at this time. I'm happy to answer anything, and also you can stay in touch.
Thanks, Alysha. This was great and so informative. I'm feeling very hungry, as I'm sure everyone else on the line is. And love that you touched on everything from what inspired you to, food justice and how to give back, and how to, apply that to your kitchen. So would like to open it up for questions. The Q&A is open if you'd like to send over any questions. I have one here to start with. Don't be shy. This one is from Hannah Cronenwetter, fellow Sigma Kappa sister. Hi, Hannah. What's been the most challenging and or rewarding thing you've experienced while launching the Kitchenologist, Alysha?
Well, thank you, Hannah, for that question. It's a really good one. I would say that the most challenging thing for me initially is personally for myself, when I start something or go all in, I want to make sure that, I'm going all into it. I'm committed. It's something that would continue. So I would say in the first, probably 3 to 4 months, and I would say honestly, right before Taproot Farm reached out to me, I was feeling a bit discouraged because I wasn't sure, I wasn't really having inspiration from anywhere. So I didn't know what to make, and I was unsure if this could really go anywhere, if anyone was interested. So with that, when Taproot Farm reached out, that was just a really pivotal moment because I was in a place where I just didn't feel like I had a lot of creativity or really a motive for doing what I was doing. So doing that has been just, so substantial in driving the blog. But I think for anybody who creates or does blogging or any type of, sharing something to the public, that's always the challenge in your head. How is this received? But I think the thing that has helped me the most is that, it's not necessarily about how much is received or how many times the recipes are liked or reshared or tried. It's really knowing that it's making a difference for the farms and the producers that I'm helping. And that really has added value to what I'm doing. And the most rewarding experience. So, I will comment on this. This was recent. So during COVID-19, I think a lot of us were faced with the whole situation of, oh my gosh, we're not celebrating holidays with our families. We don't know how to cook any of the dishes that our families traditionally make. So it's like a mad rush to figure out, okay, how does, Aunt so-and-so make this? What was grandmother's recipe for this? So I made a sort of modified version of a baked fosnut recipe. So that's a very Lancaster County thing. But I had somebody who commented on this recipe this year that I created, oh gosh, probably 3 years ago. And they commented, oh my gosh, I wasn't able to go out and get fosnuts this year because of the pandemic. I tried your recipe. They turned out perfect. Thank you so much for providing this. And, it's something that I was like, this made a small difference for someone. It made them happy. And that was really a highlight for me.
Very rewarding and makes all that hard work feel paid off. I know at some point in time you probably weren't feeling as motivated, and you talked about that earlier today too, when you're making scallion pancakes and didn't go as planned.
Yep.
Curious, as a follow-up to that, obviously, at this point in time you're feeling probably encouraged by the followers and the partnerships that you've created.
Mhm.
But as you're creating new recipes, how do you combat times in the kitchen where things may not turn out as you had planned? You were talking about that new flour that you tried and it was kind of a flop. How do you deal with that in the kitchen?
Absolutely. So it's still something that's hard for me to process. I think with anyone too, you never like to see anything fail. And also too, I have a really hard time processing food waste. I do not like to waste food. So I'm very fortunate. We do have a location that composts food scraps. So in cases when something does not turn out quite right, I'm able to take it to that location and then know that, it's being used for compost and it's being reused in some way, shape, or form. But really for me too, I guess it's like anything. If you fail at it, the best thing to do is to get back in there and try again. So if I have a day where something completely goes wrong, for me personally, I know what I have to do is step back from it for a little bit, maybe reset, maybe think about some other ways to try something. Or if something's just not working, I'll step back from that recipe and I'll go for something else or something new and try not to stress about it too much. I've had some things that I've, failed, maybe 2 or 3 times. It's just not working. And then, a month or two later, something will come to me, or I'll read something or hear something on the radio and think, I've never tried that method, or I've never tried this. Maybe I'll take it back and try it again. So I just encourage, it's an exploratory process. And I know it is a privilege too to have food that can be wasted in those experimental circumstances. Speaking with my parents, my brother and I were fortunate because we grew up in a home where we, if we messed up an egg when we were trying to scramble it or something, that wasn't a big deal. But in my parents' generation, they, told me that they didn't have, any food to waste, and I think that's relevant for a lot of people today still. So that's something that I continue to think about, that, it's a privilege. And I try to be very careful when I'm creating and experimenting to, make sure that in some way, shape, or form that food is getting, reused or recycled and back in the environment.
I love to hear that, being sustainable and mindful as you're persevering through. That's great. We have another question here from Erica Simon, another fellow Sigma Kappa sister. Great job, Alysha. Erica says, what food or vegetable did you discover along your journey that you found you love that you may not have tried before you began the Kitchenologist?
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. So I would say, and I think I mentioned this earlier, kohlrabi, it's a root vegetable, and I believe it has a Japanese origin, and I apologize if I misspeak on that. But Taproot Farm gets into some unique vegetables. They travel, so they'll come back with seeds or ideas. And if you Google kohlrabi right now, you'll find that it's a very purple looking root vegetable. So, I remember when I got that in a share for the first time, I was like, I have no idea what to do with this. And that's initially where sort of the root vegetable hash browns came from, where I learned how to, peel off the skin and then grate that down and use it in that way. So that was definitely one that was surprising for me. And then something seasonal that I just made, it's garlic scapes. So those are actually the stems that come out of bulb garlic that's in the ground. So what farmers have to do is essentially cut those off, because otherwise it will flower. So it'll be essentially taking away energy from the bulb. So you want to encourage that that's, growing. So they cut those off, and you can actually use that as a garlic substitute. It's a little bit later in garlic flavor. You can eat it raw or eat it cooked. I always recommend eating it cooked because it does tenderize it a bit. But that's something that also looks a little bit strange and kind of like worm-like, just, sort of spirally. So that's something that I would have never picked up personally before because it just looks really weird. But it's interesting too. There's so many parts of a plant that can be used. And once again, just back to that sustainability comment, I'm always intrigued by how all parts of the vegetables can be used or recycled in different ways.
Awesome. Yes, I feel like, there are so many vegetables out there, food in general, and our palates really change
Mhm.
over time. So very interesting to try out new things.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions from those in the audience? Looks like we have another one from President Green. Alysha and Laura Lee, thanks for the great presentation. Thank you for joining. Who is your favorite resource to answer food questions? Your favorite resource, Alysha?
It's a great question. Thank you, President Green. So with resources, I'll be honest, going to my farm market and talking to the producer, those are my favorite individuals to go to ask questions. So one example, I love steak, but I'm very nervous to cook steak because I'm afraid that I'm going to completely mess it up. So I always go to the producer of that stand. It's called Cornucopia Meats, and Alexi, who's the producer, he always gives me tips on how to prepare the steak, what to do, if there's anything I need to be aware of from, a cooking perspective. So I would say that honestly, those are my favorite people to go to, going directly to the farm stand and asking about how do you use this, or how have you heard of people using this? Because you'll find if it's their product, they've probably tried it a million different ways. So I always love going to them and asking about what creative ways they've heard about or they've tried. And I've really gotten some unique, recipes and ideas from just speaking with them and having that conversation.
Very neat. While we're talking about shopping and producers, so you mentioned earlier that there are certain foods that you don't buy locally, like bananas or I forgot the other item. Several things that probably are not accessible from a local market. In those instances, what kind of stores do you like to shop at? Would you encourage, of course, you may not be a personal endorser, but are there certain stores that you might encourage us to frequent if we can't shop local?
Absolutely. So, I'm thinking through this area with where I work at ECRI, we're all virtual now. So before I was very spoiled to have a Whole Foods, and I know that's probably pretty stereotypical given the conversation tonight. But their produce to me, every time I go in, it's always looking very fresh. You can select them between organic or non-organic. There are some different options there. So I certainly love going to Whole Foods, but also too, your typical, your Wegmans, your Trader Joe's. But around here, I have Giant and Weiss. So really, I think just from going in and seeing how their vegetables are set up, how fresh they look, that could be an instance for, if you are looking for a certain product to, really understand how they're stocking it. Also too, just asking the people who work there. So if you're getting a certain product and you're wondering, when does this typically come in or get shipped in, so I can try to get it as soon as it's here to kind of cut back on some of that travel time and sitting in the grocery store, I would say just to ask. So there have been a few times that I've asked that I've noticed, the bananas haven't been looking that great. So I'll just ask and be like, hey, do you know when, the bananas are shipped in or when they typically come? So you can get advice that way too. If you're, living in an area that may not have as many options from a food perspective or things getting shipped in.
That's a great tip. Thank you. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. I'd like to open it up for another question. We probably have time for one more if anyone has another question. No, I don't think so. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you, Alysha, for answering all of our questions and educating a little bit more about the Kitchenologist and food sustainability. I'd like to invite you all to join for homecoming. This year, it's going to be in person, October 22nd to the 24th. So looking forward to seeing you guys in person. I believe there should be some virtual events as well. And looking forward to hopefully seeing you there. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
And don't forget to follow Alysha if you haven't already. Great content, super inspiring. Love seeing her in the kitchen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura Lee and Susan.